start for now. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, which will delve deeper into the International Confidence Index for Businesses, which has been launched for the very first time in Malta through a collaboration with the Malta Chamber and VISTAGE. I would like to welcome our panelists for this webinar, Ms. Marisa Shwirek, who is Deputy President of the Malta Chamber, Mr. Nathan Farrugia, who is the CEO at VISTAGE Malta, and Mr. Joe Galvin, who is the Chief Research Officer at VISTAGE Worldwide. I would like for everyone to note to please use the Q&A icon below to submit any questions for a Q&A that will happen later on during the webinar. I now pass the floor to Ms. Shwirek for her introductory remarks. Ma'am, Marisa.
Thank you, Mel. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for taking the time to join us for this webinar. We are honored to have been chosen by VISTAGE to actually collaborate on this first CEO Confidence Index in Malta. I think VISTAGE have brought on board this confidence index at a time when confidence is of critical importance. If there was one thing that was badly hit by the COVID pandemic, it was indeed business confidence. And I think it's very important, very critical, that all policy actions that are taken are informed in the sense that we have the pulse on CEOs' sentiments, on what our business leaders are thinking, feeling, and saying, because admittedly, CEOs have a window into their industries that will enable policy makers to make better informed decisions. And I think VISTAGE has come on board with this confidence index really at the right time. It has also brought with them an international dimension, which is critical to understanding how a pandemic of international proportions is affecting not just our country, our economy, but also the international business world on which we all depend, whether directly or indirectly. And I think the comparisons are extremely interesting. The comparisons of the results of the survey run in Malta with those run in other countries. And I think it is from there that we can gain most insight into not only what this business sentiment locally is, but on how this compares with that of other countries, and on whether our expectations are well aligned with what is happening internationally. So this is what some of the insight that we expect to be able to share with you today. And I leave it in the good hands of Nathan Farrugia and Joe Galvin to give us their perspective on this. And I appeal to you all following this webinar to support this initiative by replying to future editions of this confidence index survey, which will happen every 3 months, so that we can have a really, really informed opinion about what the business sentiment is, and we can represent the interests of business as a chamber in a better way. Thank you.
Hi all, thank you Marisa, and thanks to everybody for turning up. Just a little bit of a history here. I joined VISTAGE as a very young CEO, really not knowing how to lead, and whilst I had my training and my courses and all that, I really felt that I needed to have the right people around me to help with decision support. And VISTAGE was something I turned to because it creates opportunities for CEOs who sometimes feel lonely at the top to be able to meet together on a regular basis, to be able to network, to be able to solve problems together, and work non-judgmentally to be able to support each other's business. And obviously, my role now, bringing VISTAGE to Malta, is to continue to enhance that by bringing the tools that we are able to access internationally, and that includes a research arm. So today's focus really is understanding how research into the minds of yourselves, business leaders, in Malta, and comparing also with those around the world, 24,000 CEOs around the world in over 20 countries that contribute to this CI index, gives us some perspective into how leaders make decisions as times change. Obviously, as Marisa rightly said, today is very topical with the situation we are in, However, the VISTAGE research program has been going for many years, as Joe will explain, and this allows particularly people in the US and the UK to determine what type of decisions they need to take based on the understanding of everybody else's confidence. So we might have our own personal ideas of how confident we are about the decisions we're taking, but how do we compare that with our market? How do we compare it with industry? How do we compare that with our economy? And how do we make sure we're not just standing alone in these decisions and have the comfort to know that actually other people are thinking like we are? And this allows us to be able to make the right decisions, because the decisions we take today as leaders are the ones that are going to impact the economy in the future. In fact, we know from many years of this confidence index that typically the findings of the confidence index actually show changes to the economy, or predict to a certain extent the economy 6 months in advance, which is extremely useful because it allows us to actually start to think about the decisions we're going to take in 6 months' time. Now, we've seen the survey, obviously, we've shared this with the press, and there's been an opportunity for you to download it. And we've kept it extremely simple, as it should be, because the decisions that you take should be based on succinct and simple and straightforward information and insight. The survey in itself was sent out before the end of the year, and we intend to do this before the end of each quarter to then present the results in the beginning of the next quarter. The results we had were from over 100 CEOs and business leaders, including VISTAGE members and chamber members. We think that this is a good start. However, we feel that obviously the more data points we have, the more accurate the findings will be. So we do encourage you, as Marisa said, to be able to participate in this survey in the future. It's not a long survey. It's straightforward. However, it is very, very insightful, especially when you start to compare with trends. So not necessarily comparing internationally, but also comparing history. So, you know, how are the results over the next 3 months going to differ from the results we had in Q1? And what does that tell us? As such, VISTAGE is not really taking decisions or influencing economic policy or things like that. We really actually are just a sounding board of your opinion. So we're just taking your opinion and we're putting it into informatics that allow us to be able to share and discuss. And even today, you know, after Joe's presentation, we do want to have a discussion. We want to have a debate. Do you agree with what was in the survey? Is that sentiment true to you? You know, let's have interesting conversations around these findings, because these are the things that really are telling on how you will make decisions, you know, coming out of this, and how we will emerge from the situation. So, you know, as much as I obviously I'm a big fan of VISTAGE and how useful it's been to me, I hope that this information is useful to you. And if you do want to learn more about VISTAGE, please do reach out, visit the website, and you know, continue to support this this initiative, which Chamber has really gone out of their way to support. You know, there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done in order to do something like this, and Chamber have really come out and shown extreme support with this. So we are really appreciative of their initiative and their curiosity to see how this would pan out. Perhaps now I pass on to Joe. Joe is head of research. I've had the pleasure of listening to Joe many times as a partner for VISTAGE globally, and watched him on stage do his thing. And he is very eloquent, but he's also very smart. So I think we're going to gain some very interesting insight, and hopefully also raise some questions around the comparisons and also the findings that have come out of our confidence index in Malta. Joe?
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Nathan, and Marisa. It's nice to see you. Let me share my screen real quick, and we can begin. Here we go. As Nathan mentioned, I am the Chief Research Officer for VISTAGE. My background was with a company called Gartner, which was IT research and advice for many years. My last 5 years there, I was focused on CRM, customer relationship management, and Salesforce automation, a variety of other business research functions. And 5 years ago, I was brought to VISTAGE by the VISTAGE CEO, Sam Rees, to create VISTAGE Research, a function that's designed to understand what are the issues, topics, and decisions that are most important to the VISTAGE community. As Nathan described, there's a number of decisions you're facing, and clearly only you can decide what's right for your business. But what we try to provide is an insight at a level above what you get or experience in your VISTAGE group or interactions, which is, what does our community think? I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. I post content that's relevant to the small, mid-sized enterprise CEO community on a daily basis. You can follow me on Twitter at Joe Galvin. And I truly believe I have the best job in the world, because all I do is focus on what our members say is most important to them. And then we go out and we find the experts, we collect the data, both the data that comes from our members and the data that comes from other places, to be able to create a composite of what these issues are and how people are thinking about them, as one more source for you to incorporate from your judgment into your perspective as you make the decisions going to help your business move forward. So again, I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn, follow me on Twitter, and know that at VISTAGE Research, all we are is focused on what's important to you. As I said, our mission is to become your most trusted resource for research, data, and expert perspectives on the issues, topics, and decisions of business optimization and leadership enhancement. Our CEO Confidence Index captures the sentiments, the thinking, the thoughts of our community. It's not digital data. Economists provide the fact-based, rear-looking data, and based on that history, they project forward. Now, that's tough for them now, because anything looking backwards over the last year doesn't really connect to what's going to happen in the year ahead. And as we know, a year ago, everyone's forecasts, strategic plans, and business strategies all got thrown in the trash can pretty quick, as we all adapted to the survival mode and then the recovery mode of this pandemic that we're still in. And that's what our goal is, to capture the sentiments of our community. And while it's not digitally precise, it is directionally accurate. And that's what you'll see as we go through a little bit of a history lesson on the confidence index. But we'll also want to look at the UK confidence index, the US confidence index, and how that compares to Malta. You should also know that we do extensive confidence index work in Canada, Australia, Malaysia, Argentina, and other smaller countries like Peru, Uruguay, and other places around the planet. We're beginning to stand these up because it's a way to gather information that goes beyond what people get in their groups. So let's jump into this with your permission, and then I want to share some other data that we've done that I think you'll find interesting. This is a concept that we created a year ago, April, to try to make sense of what this coronavirus pandemic was going to be. And it started with a trigger event, which happened theoretically in a wet market in China back in December or January. And it was around this time last year that we reached a tipping point. For those of us in the States, it was when we had the first market crash in late February, followed by another one in early March. And even though our case loads were really low, all of a sudden we were aware that something bad was happening. And that led us down to the bottom, and we went into this pause, this lockdown. And since then, we've been looking for signs of life to rebuild our business, to reboot our business, rebuild, recover. And now I believe where we're at is a time of transition. And that is that we've risen to a point of recovery where we've learned to live with it as is. Some levels of normalcy, but other things we're still not comfortable doing. And we're going to continue to reside in that. But now as the vaccine begins to become available, I just learned that in my state, I live in Connecticut, so I'm about 90 minutes from New York City, that based on my age, I'll be eligible on March 1st to get the vaccine. As the vaccine moves through our country, through Malta, around the world, we'll go through this time of transition until we reach this new reality. Now, I don't believe that it's going to be a new normal or the next normal. There'll be nothing normal about this new reality we go into, because so much has changed. Our ability to interact in a virtual world. We saw 15 years of behavior change in just 30 days as we adapted from our traditional face-to-face world to working and dealing and living in this thing called Zoom and these virtual meetings. We've seen a movement towards the no-touch or touchless environment, the acceleration of that. You know, grocery delivery. Just think of all the different things that we've adapted to quickly that our human nature would have allowed us to. This new reality will be one that will reward and prioritize digital transformation. It is our technology infrastructure that has allowed us to survive at this point. You know, could you imagine trying to do this 15 years ago? We didn't have the collaboration tools. We didn't have the technologies, the internet bandwidth. We didn't have the platforms to do this. But it just happened to come at this point in time when we could do that. So we use the corona curve just as a visual to try to make sense of this as a function of business activity over time. If we now connect that to our confidence index, you'll see, especially if we look at Q4 of 2019, we've got our own little corona curve thing going on here in the States. We had seen through Q3 in 2019, 7 consecutive quarters of decaying confidence until we saw a spark in Q4 of 2019. We thought, that's it. 2020 is going to be the year. Prepare for prosperity. Here we go. and then the roof fell in. Our March data began to show that. Again, we take our surveys 4 times a year in the 3rd month of the quarter, the 1st week. So this is the 1st week of March. We took it at 84. It was at 84.7. If we had done this, we don't calculate on a monthly basis, but we did survey in April, that number was 42. That's how far it fell. But when we came back to Q2, we hit bottom at 65, but now you see we've come back, and most recently Q4 is 88.0. What we've seen in the United States over the last, call it Q4, is a flattening of the recovery. We've asked questions regarding, and I know you asked the questions as well, about the economic impact of the pandemic to your revenues, to your cash flow. And those numbers haven't really moved in the last 3 or 4 months. I'm anxious to see what happens when we take our survey next week, the 1st week of March. But you can see how this follows the pandemic, that our confidence has recovered, but it's weighed down by the current situation. Nathan referenced this, but this is a really powerful chart to look at. The confidence index is in the red and US GDP is in the blue. And what you'll see is more or less, it's not, again, digitally precise, but more or less, the confidence index leads GDP by 3 to 6, in some cases, 9 months. The reason is, and we'll break down the components of this, is that of the 6 key questions we've been asking since 2003, 5 of them ask about the year ahead. So based on our CEO's community confidence, and we know that small and mid-sized business drives the economies of most countries, we see that that's what's going to drive business going forward, right? If we compare it to the UK, you can see in the UK, it followed a very similar trajectory, only from a higher high in Q4 to a higher high in Q4 of 2020. Obviously in the UK, they've had to deal with Brexit in addition to the pandemic, which has only compounded the uncertainty and the challenges that they've faced. But you see a very similar pattern as we've tracked these indexes over time. If we now begin to break this down and look at the components, the first area we look at is the economy. In the United States, 8% of CEOs said the economy had recently improved. And obviously, those are people that are thriving. We've got 32, 34% of our community whose revenues are equal to or greater than, but 59% expect that to improve in the year ahead. If we compare that to the UK, you can see the numbers are very similar. When we look at the Malta data, you see it skews much more towards the negative. But when you peel this back, and I dug inside of it, not so much in the current, but looking ahead, this is, I think it will improve. If you ask the question, will remain the same, these numbers balance out. So for example, in the US, remain the same is 24, but in Malta, 28. So that means, or 38 rather, so 78% of folks in Malta think the economy will remain the same or improve in the year ahead. And that number connects to the low 80s for the US. So while the degree of improvement may not be as high, when you look at the aggregate of equal to or greater than, it's in the same range. The next element then is prospects. And we see that 67% of our CEOs expect increased revenues in the year ahead, and 55% expect increased profits. In the UK, those numbers are even higher. Now, again, the UK has been wrestling with the Brexit challenge and how that's disrupted trade. They've gone through 3 lockdowns. They're just about to emerge from the 3rd. But again, they are leading Europe in terms of percent of first jabs, as they say, first people getting the injections. And over time, as more and more people are injected with the vaccine, we'll see more and more return to economic activity. In Malta, again, those numbers are substantially lower until we add in the equal to numbers, and then they start to balance up again. 35% think their revenues will remain the same, which now brings that up into the 80s. 35% on increased profits will remain the same on top of 38%. And the third component are expansion plans. 40%, 40% of CEOs in the United States will increase their investments. That's on top of 44% who will continue. So 88% are going to continue or increase their investments in business, and 64% will increase hiring. In the UK, we see similar numbers. An interesting point here, especially on hiring. In the US, 64% are going to increase headcount. A year ago, coming into what we thought was going to be a year of prosperity, that number was 54%. So clearly there's some recovery from the pandemic, but there's also the understanding that we're about to move into the next economic expansion that we will see on the other side as we get the vaccines in place in the second half of 21 and into 22 and beyond. We'll see an economic surge driven by pent-up demand from consumers, business investment that we see, hiring, as people return to work, consumers have more money in their pockets, we'll see a surge. If we look at the Malta numbers, again, we see they are behind both the US and the UK. It's when you add in the equal to last year that things begin to normalize. One of the economists that we work with and presents at all our events in the States is a gentleman named Brian Bolio from ITR Economics. And he made a comment that stuck with me. And that was that our economy wasn't broken, it was shut down. In 2008, the economy was fundamentally broken. There were some major flaws in our system, the global system. The economy was broken and had to get fixed. Our economy was not broken. Our economy was shut down. So as we reopen it, our economy will flourish, and it creates a tremendous opportunity for us to grow and move forward. And that's why I want to share with you this report, CEO Projections 2021, Reigniting the Growth Engine. This report will be released to the US members tomorrow. So you're getting a look at it a day before, but you're welcome to it. It has US data, but I think the concepts are the ones you'll connect with, and I'll show you, because we asked open-ended questions about what are the major decisions you'll have to make. And I'd ask you to stop and think for a minute. What are the major decisions you're facing right now coming into 21? What are your top investments? Where are you going to spend money? And then what are the unique leadership? What are the most significant leadership challenges you're facing? As I said, this report will be available tomorrow, and Nathan can make that available to you. So let's ask, what we do, I want to pause for a minute. We use this model, we call it the decision model. It's a lens that we use to help us understand the decisions that leaders have to make. At the center is, as a leader, you make decisions every day about how you show up as a leader, how you engage, how you talk, how you connect. The next layer is leadership, which are the processes, the disciplines, the foundations of how you lead. And the outside layer is business optimization, the elements of your business that you're trying to drive. This was all created and validated by working with over 50 VISTAGE chairs, taking down 8,000 plus words and putting them through a magic text analytics engine. We wrap that with our optimized decision-making concept, which says decisions are always a function of our instincts, which is how we feel about a decision, our judgment, which is how we think about it, and the perspectives we incorporate from people and resources we trust and respect. And again, we think that CEOs are in the business of making decisions, and we use this decision model as a way to bring common language and a framework to think about the type of decisions you're facing. So let's ask this question. What are the major decisions you'll make regarding your business in 2021? What are your top decisions? What do you think the top 2 or 3 are? Well, here's what they were in the UK. Hiring, recruiting, and sourcing. Hiring people. You need people to scale the business, followed by product pricing, performance management, HR, market development. What's unique about this, if you look at this, you see product pricing, you skip to market development, and you go on down to some of these areas. You can see how these decisions are playing out from a UK standpoint. If you look at the top US decisions, you see an identical top 4. Identical top 4. In the US, you also see market development, you see sales, you see marketing, product and pricing. These are all elements that drive growth, that are part of reigniting the growth engine. If we talk about areas of business you'll invest in, where will you be investing in 2021? And again, here we see technology, top of the list. Why? Well, technology is the change agent of our generation, right? Technology, the 4 years we've done this in the States, and you see technology again is at the top. It's been the top investment. Why? Because it drives your business. What's interesting is that technology, traditionally 45% of the technology spent, at least the last couple of years, has been on CRM, customer relationship management technology. So when you combine technology with marketing, product pricing and sales, again, you see this focus on reigniting the growth engine, on doing the work now, preparing now for the growth that's going to come in the second half of the year. But this is the one that was really interesting. I ask you to pause and think about this for a minute. What is the most significant leadership challenge you are facing? Most significant leadership challenge. I mean, leadership's hard, right? We know that. It's managing morale. This is the UK. Managing morale. Let's face it, the stress of this pandemic has been unlike any of us has faced. Not just the intensity, but the duration of it. And we saw words like burnout, executive burnout. We saw, COVID fatigue, tired, lack of engagement. We see CEOs trying to drive focus and engagement and morale and getting people motivated, because it's taken all of our energies just to survive this, let alone climb out of what I call the Corona ditch. And now to be prepared to take on this growth challenge, managing morale emerges as the #1 issue. Not surprising and well connected to that in the UK is culture. It's developing employees, engaging employees. This whole work from home and return to work, that's a paradigm that's going to change. Listen, the work from home genie is out of the bottle. And we're all going to have to make decisions about what that means. And then hiring and retention. They also had some issues around leadership, about what's the right strategy going forward, whether they have to re-engineer or redesign their business or to continue to capitalize on the things they've done. Comments about how they align and connect and reposition their leadership team, communication, and succession planning. And I'll show you this in a minute. And underlying all this in the UK was uncertainty. Uncertainty is driving everything these days and is compounded there by the Brexit situation. Now take a look at the US. Most significant leadership challenge in the US, managing morale, same thing. We are all struggling with the challenges. So you think about, it's not just the challenges we face in the office and the disconnect from people, but it's the challenges we have at home. Maybe you've got young children and you're trying to work from home and manage young children. Maybe you've got elderly parents and you're trying to care for and protect them. It's a level of stress and pressure that in our lifetimes we haven't felt. And that's why this is such a top issue. Again, look, you see hiring, retention. How do we build and maintain culture in those situations that you can with a work from home environment and bring that back, because culture is what you experience walking the halls. And if you can't walk the halls, so when do you return to work, and what's that balance for work from home? The uncertainty of COVID-19, that's underlying everything. We see a lot of businesses in transition. One of the things that I believe is we've seen a pause in terms of ability to sell, people wanting to retire, people wanting to change. I firmly believe that both employees and customers will reward or punish us, based on how we treated them during this period of time. I thought it was interesting. Aging workforce came up. A lot of people probably delayed retirement because they're not sure what they're retiring into. But once we get through this, that'll change. But underlying it all is this concept of return to growth, and our belief that now is the time to reignite your growth engine. Now is the time to tune your business to prepare for the growth that will be coming once the vaccine takes hold. And I'll close with this concept that we are in a time of transition. Could you imagine how dark it would be if we didn't have the vaccines on the horizon? If we couldn't see that was coming, if they said it's going to be another year or two? Well, we don't have that. We're in a time of transition. We're seeing political change. In my country, we've just gone through one of the most contentious elections, again, in my lifetime. And in the UK, it's always a little uncertain politically, but depending on your point of view, and again, in our community, we've got all points of view. It was the best of times or the worst of times. And that continues to be true. I believe and I hope that we've passed now peak COVID. January was just a savage month in terms of hospitalizations and deaths. We just passed and had a ceremony last night of 500,000 people in our country, in my country, US, that have passed. But hopefully we're past peak COVID. And with the vaccine on the horizon, I said I can register March 1st to get mine. The end is in sight. And I'll close with this quote because it's such a powerful one from Winston Churchill. And it's from November of 1942, a time that I know in Malta was very, very critical. But it was after the Second Battle of El Alamein, when the British in El Alamein and now the Americans come in on the other side had successfully defended the Suez Canal and protected the Egyptian oil fields. This was at the same time that the Battle of Stalingrad raged in Russia and Guadalcanal in the Pacific. The UK, Europe had already been at war for 2.5 years, and Winston Churchill said, now is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. War would rage for the 2.5 years. We've got a long way to go with COVID. We'll learn to live with COVID for the rest of our lives. But right now, this could be the beginning of the end. This could be the start of the transition as vaccines take place, which is why it's a time for us to focus on our business, reigniting our growth engine, preparing our sales team to connect with our customers and our prospect, and recognize that better times are ahead and the time to prepare for it is now. So I'd like to thank Nathan and the Chamber of Commerce for giving me the opportunity for VISTAGE Research to share the work that we do. I invite you to ask Nathan to request our research report on CEO projections. I'd love to engage with some questions and spend more time with the folks here. So thank you very much for the time and the opportunity to share the work that we do.
Thank you, Joe, for that. We'll pass on to the discussion section of the webinar, and just to maybe kick off this part of the webinar, I have a first question for Marisa. In light of the several projects undertaken by Malta Chamber, such as the think tank and the economic vision, in what way do you see the proposals within such initiatives reflected in the survey result?
I think we have to frame these results for Malta in the context of an economy that is very much dependent on the tourism sector. So if we compare the results, I think one of the reasons why we seem to expect a longer recovery period is actually because so much of our economy is either tourism or somehow attached to tourism. The other factor is that as businesses and the government as policymaker sought to protect employment across the board. And I think you see this not just in our employment numbers, but also in the fact that CEOs in the US and the UK have it on their priority list to hire, whereas CEOs in Malta, in the majority, don't think that they will be increasing their employment numbers because most of their employees are already on board. So this is a big difference to the scenario in the UK and the US, and it reflects the loyalty and retention policies that have dominated our handling of COVID as a country. When we recall the discussions that happened within the chamber in terms of our think tank, a lot of discussions that tried to steer beyond this first priority of maintaining employment numbers. And I think it is those discussions that we have to return to with some urgency, I would say, when you look at these figures and you see that CEOs in other countries are actually looking at more investment than we are at the moment. I think this is one of the things that comes out very clearly, that we've kind of frozen our employment market, our labor market. We've managed to freeze this over the COVID pandemic. Not too much movement of labor, and that kind of movement of labor creates some dynamics in the market, you know, that have happened in the US and have happened in the UK, but to a much lesser extent here. So we have to go beyond that now and think of what sort of re-engineering, what sort of investment, what sort of new approaches to the market we need to look at. And there's a lot of those discussions that happened at the roundtables at the beginning that need to be picked up again, sector by sector, to be able to have a strategy which is, I wouldn't even say post-COVID, because I think it's a little bit too early to talk about post-COVID, but that can work even in the presence of COVID that is being addressed by a vaccination program that is gradually being rolled out. Yeah, but this is very, very, very important. I think most of the differences between our results and those of the UK and the US have to do with what was the priority in our country during the first, let's call it the first round of COVID, which was the past 12 months, okay? Protection of employment. Now we have to look beyond this, and the Chamber has been very active on this front, I would say, since the beginning. So even though we were among the constituted bodies that advocated for measures such as the wage supplement to be able to retain employees, because we know how difficult it is to hire good resources, I think now the focus really needs to shift into investment, into research, into innovation, into digitization, into renewal of our business in different directions.
Thank you, Marita, for your insight. I've got a question directed to Nathan, and maybe Joe can also chime in. With regards to the survey results, one of the questions, the majority of the answers, the respondents noted that the economic conditions in Malta will be better in the next year. In your opinions, what sort of factors could influence this optimistic approach? Nathan, you need to unmute.
Still haven't got used to that. I think, as Marisa said, the salary support schemes have really made a difference because you know, this has perhaps supported companies to continue to, whilst on a slower level, continue to operate. So I think this rearing to go is a human trait that perhaps Maltese people have, that is quite clear, and we are probably a bit fed up of the situation and want to get on with it. So I think there is a lot of that sentiment, particularly in VISTAGE groups and the CEOs I speak to, they're saying, let's move forwards now, enough of this sitting and waiting. So I think the sentiment is reflected in the survey. I think there's also the negative side of the Zoom fatigue and, being frustrated by waiting about, do we go back to the office or not? And people are just ready to make a decision and say, okay, let's deal with it. Let's just say, okay, it is what it is, and now we're going to have to move on. I think also what's changed for me, speaking to business leaders, is that whilst we saw a significant negative impact on our business, actually quality of life, strangely, has improved. Obviously, I'm not recounting to people that were ill, but most of the CEOs I speak to say, my work-life balance is actually better. We survey our members on work-life balance as well as their business, and most of them are saying, you know what, I'm spending more time with my family, I'm doing more exercise than I ever did, and this mindset actually helps fuel the positivity that we are seeing in the survey. When you are good in your own head, and when things are right at home, you automatically feel better about prospects, and I think this is coming through. And it also begs the question, how do we make sure we continue to do this going forwards? Don't go back to the 18-hour days, sat behind our desk or behind our screen. Sorry,
I'll add into this as well, is that where I shared national numbers, last week I presented to Las Vegas, which, like Malta, is highly dependent upon tourism. And tomorrow we present at Dallas, which has a much more diversified manufacturing construction type economy. And the Las Vegas numbers were down and the Dallas numbers were up. But what was common in the threads and the discussion groups in Las Vegas was this concept of pent-up demand, that we are all itching to go somewhere. We are all waiting to get on a plane and go to somewhere and do something other than stay inside the walls of my house or within my drivable. So I think the surge that will come as we reach this herd mentality concept and the vaccine is more deeply penetrated and more people feel comfortable. I think you'll see that surge come back. And I think that is possibly one of the factors driving the optimism that our community in Malta, and certainly the community in Las Vegas, we're sensing that, again, as you get to this other side and you get more confidence, people are anxious to go, and that'll drive it. And with that comes other components that drive other aspects and fuel that entire business growth cycle. The Economist in the UK, for example, was extremely positive on their future second half of this year and next year, and the broader European community as a whole, just driven by this pent-up demand of economy's not broken. Those that have remained employed and have gotten paychecks have more savings than ever before, and they're going to direct that to doing something fun, I think. At least I'm planning on it.
Yes.
Thank you both. We've got another question from the Q&A function, which says, could you share the views or expectations by leaders and CEOs in relation to government measures we will face to mitigate the deficits in state budgets, which may face us in view of the measures taken to date to sustain the economies? Perhaps some compare and contrast exercises between countries and the pulse being felt or expected.
I didn't get the first part of the question. Could you explain it again?
Sure. Could you share the views or expectations by leaders and CEOs in relation to government measures?
Okay. Marisa, perhaps? I think this is more your area.
I think with respect to government deficits, the only silver lining of the situation is that every country is more or less in the same boat. So every country, every government has had to dig deep into its pockets to keep as much of the economy supported as possible. So by the end of it, every country will be carrying a certain amount of national debt, which will of course need to be repaid. But if we look at the situation in Malta, for example, there is quite a lot of private savings at the banks. So it's not like the country is bankrupt. we have to have creative ways now of utilizing those savings. And some of them have remained unutilized as a direct consequence of the pandemic. So a lot of people have sat on their cash in the meantime because they're not spending as much as they used to. And we have to see how to use now the national savings in the economy, not just in the government, to be able to fund our way out of the economic implications of COVID over time. But what we can safely say is that in terms of international competitiveness, we will not be worse off than other countries because we have a government deficit. And let's not forget that the deficit is an annual thing. So at the beginning of the year, you start from zero again. What you accumulate is, of course, government debt. But as long as you are able to finance this, I don't think this will be a major issue, precisely because all countries have the same challenges. And what we're seeing in Europe especially, and in the European Union, is dealing with these mounting government debts, and also with Brexit, which has had a significant impact on the European Union budget. So there will be a major rethink in how governments fund their activities. That's for sure. But what is definitely there that wasn't there probably in the 2008 pandemic, not in the 2008 economic crisis, not pandemic, is a willingness by governments to dig deep into their pockets to help the economy. So whereas in the 2008 crisis, European governments were very much on the austerity side of things, I think this time around, they've been more forthcoming. And to be fair, they didn't really have a choice because the impact of this crisis was far, far greater. And everybody had to, throw all his resources to try to address this.
Joe, is there an international?
Yeah, I was going to say, from a deficit standpoint, no one's got a bigger deficit than the United States, and we're on the cusp of passing another $1.9 trillion stimulus package, which will take our deficit somewhere too big a number to even comprehend. The counter to that is the fact that interest rates are at historically low levels, and they will remain at those low levels well into 23, maybe 24. So the cost of servicing that debt at this time is not overbearing. But then you now really need to speak to economists, and again, it's a tale of two cities, because ITR Economics, Brian Bolio, Alan Bolio, they're Austrian economists, and they believe that this is a significant burden and will be a significant drag, and that when we reach the end of this decade, that deficit, along with the demographic shift of more people taking money from the system that contribute, will lead to a very deep economic crash. The other side of that coin is the economist Roger Martin Fagg, who does the confidence index for the UK. And he has a concept that says deficit schmeficit. It's the country creating money and printing money. When they print money, they put it out into the economy takes that money and makes investments and hires people, and people buy stuff, and the economy grows, and the deficit is not an issue. It's not like you and I owe money on our car or our home and we have to pay it back to the bank because there's that strict accounting. In the big bank in the sky that the governments work in, what magic goes on up there, I'm not sure, but depending upon your economic point of view, the deficits are powerful tools to drive growth. And in the 2008 example, to really give the economy time to heal. And in the COVID economy, protect people, allow them to feed their families and continue to work and be employed. So when we come out of the health crisis, we will very quickly be able to step on the economic accelerator.
We've got maybe time for another question from our attendees. In view of the deficit being accumulated by the government, which means less incentives and support coming in our way throughout these next years, how risky is it for organizations to continue to invest in growth?
Well, if I may, I think here it's the way you invest in growth. And I think the key word here is sustainability, rather than try and recoup funds or profitability too quickly. It's really about being in the long game and thinking about how the decisions you're taking today are going to support your business going forwards in the long term. And I think then this approach will hopefully create more independence in companies and create more sustainable cash flow going forwards, where they would be less dependent on incentives and support. So let's, in a way, to a certain extent, not look at this as a crutch, as the need to have these incentives in place for us to run our businesses and grow our businesses, but the ability of us as thinkers to be able to find ways to grow our businesses without incentives. And that would be the ideal situation. Now, realistically, I know that certain industries have different impacts and different situations, but I think that sort of the philosophy of sustainability and independence for me is something that I hear a lot in conversations around moving forward.
I would think the risk of not investing is greater, and that is that we are going to see this economic surge on the backside of this experience and a period of sustained growth. And should you not invest early and should you not invest efficiently, you will miss that growth. And now you're going to be playing catch up. And it's really hard to catch a running horse at full speed. Consequently, where there's always inherent risk, and to Nathan's point, the importance of sustainability and be able to manage it intelligently, there are unique windows of opportunity in the economic and business life cycle. And I think we're approaching one now. And those with a foresight and the courage and the wherewithal to make those investments will come out way ahead versus those that may choose to be much more conservative.
Yes, I think also, I mean, when we say less incentive support coming our way, a lot of the support that has come our way was not really incentivizing investment anyway. So it was always up to the private sector to invest in its future growth. And particularly during the pandemic, a lot of the support coming our way from government was to safeguard jobs rather than to invest more. And in this sense, I would expect that government policy will shift away from that kind of support now to support that actually encourages investment. So I think this is the way that we can emerge out of this pandemic economically stronger than we entered into it. I think this is very, very important. Investment will be the key. And I think deficit or no deficit, governments will go out of their way to facilitate investment. And sometimes it's not a question of providing funding for something. Sometimes it's a question of providing the right economic environment, the right tax systems, the right regulation. These are all policies that can encourage investment and that do not necessarily need to impact the fiscal situation of the government.
Thank you all. Due to time constraints, I believe we should be moving into the last part of the webinar. So I give the floor to Nathan to give a brief summary and maybe the future of the CEO Confidence Index.
Well, essentially, as we said, we want to make sure that we can build some trends around the confidence index. So the more participants we have at the next one, which will be coming out within the next few weeks, the stronger the index will be, and this will allow us to have over time some predictions. So I think this is going back out to the people here and their colleagues and people in the membership of Chamber of Commerce and VISTAGE to find the time to answer the survey. It's not very complicated. So like I said, the time well worth spent. I think conversations like this are important to be sustained as well. You know, we're all going to go off and do our own thing tomorrow at work, but when do we find time to collaborate, to discuss, to debate, and to share ideas? So, you know, the questions that have been asked in this Q&A can be answered by the members themselves. So these conversations, in my mind, need to happen on a regular basis. And so therefore, we will plan the opportunity for webinars like this to be able to happen after each confidence index result, to be able to continue this conversation.
Great. Joe, Marisa, maybe your concluding remarks?
I would compound what Nathan said, and that the quality of this data is driven by the type of participants and the number of participants. And when I look at and compare other studies that look at our segments in terms of company size and that, the fact that we have got such large numbers, diverse numbers, both in terms of geography, but also vertical markets, it really adds strength to the data. It validates the data and allows us to drill into different aspects. But again, this is a sentiment data. It's what CEOs think. It's what they believe. It's when you combine the sentiment data with the factual data that you really can create a picture that will allow you to make the best possible decision for your business, because as I started, only you can decide what's right for your business. It's our job to share with you how others like you are thinking about similar concepts. And thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this today.
Yes, definitely. I mean, this is a survey where you can participate to benefit yourself. The actual exercise of filling it in is in itself triggers a thought process in you. You know, it makes you rationalize your thoughts, your foresight in the future, and having the possibility to compare this to other CEOs, both within the same economy and internationally. I think this is absolutely brilliant. VISTAGE are very efficient also at publishing the results soon after they are collected, and I think this is a big benefit as well, because you get real-time information, real-time data. And I look forward to more of this collaboration as a chamber, because I'm sure that we can help each other have a better insight into what's going on at the level of business leadership. So thanks a lot for this.
Great. Thank you so much for everyone. Thank you for all the panelists and the speakers who joined us this afternoon. I would urge anyone who's interested in downloading the results to get in touch to download the results. And I wish everyone a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Okay.